Welcome to History to Relax. Tonight, we'll take a slow journey through one of the most fascinating mysteries of the 20th century, the story of the Enigma machine. It is a tale of secrecy, of quiet persistence, of minds working tirelessly in hidden rooms while the world outside was torn apart by war. Over the course of this story, you'll hear about how the machine was invented, how it worked, how it was finally broken, and the human struggles that surrounded its secrets. As you listen, I invite you to get comfortable. Find a place where you can sit back, take a deep breath, and allow the weight of the day to fall away. Let the rhythm of the words carry you gently into history, a place where time slows and the past unfolds like a calm dream. Before we begin, I'd love to ask something simple of you. If you enjoy these stories, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know, and it allows me to continue bringing you long, gentle journeys into the past. And if you'd like, share a comment below letting us know where you're listening from. It's always wonderful to see our community stretch across the world, each of us connected by curiosity, history, and a moment of quiet reflection together. Now, if you're ready, let's begin. Part 1. The Whisper of Wires. Imagine a quiet room, lit not by the bright light of day, but by the soft glow of a single desk lamp. The air is heavy with the faint smell of oil and paper, the kinds of scents that linger in old offices where machinery and ink share the same space. At the center of the room, resting upon a wooden table, sits a curious box. Its surface is polished but plain, its edges square, its size not much larger than a typewriter. Keys are arranged neatly, waiting to be pressed. Above them, a row of small circular lamps waits in silence, each marked with a letter. And within, hidden from casual view, a set of metal rotors rests in their sockets, waiting for the moment when power will flow and their hidden wirings will begin to dance. This box would come to be known as the Enigma machine, one of the most famous devices in modern history. It looked unassuming, but its story would stretch across decades, through war and secrecy, through triumph and tragedy. Before it became a symbol of mystery and cryptography, it was the dream of a man, Arthur Scourbius, and a reflection of a world still recovering from the wounds of the First World War. The year was 1918, and Germany was a nation humbled. The war that had begun with so much confidence had ended with loss, hardship, and humiliation. The Treaty of Versailles imposed strict terms, and a sense of bitterness and instability settled over the country. Factories stood idle, soldiers returned home to uncertain futures, and the economy faltered. Yet amid the struggle, there were also minds who turned toward invention. The early 20th century was a time of rapid technological change. Electricity was spreading into homes and businesses. Telephones connected voices across distances once thought impossible. Radio waves carried sounds through the air. But with these advances came a new concern: how to keep messages private. A whispered secret could be overheard. A written letter could be intercepted. In the age of wireless communication, how could one be sure that words sent from one place would not be stolen in the air before reaching their destination? This was the question that Arthur Scourbius, an engineer born in Frankfurt, set out to answer. He was a man of quiet determination, more at home with gears and equations than with politics. By training, he was both an electrical engineer and a businessman, and he believed that the future belonged to those who could marry science with commerce. Scourbius had studied at the Technical University of Munich and the Technical University of Hanover. He was fascinated by electricity, still a relatively new force in daily life, and by the possibilities of electrical circuits to process and transform information. His career took him into both engineering and entrepreneurship, where he worked on motors and electrical systems. But in the years after the war, his attention turned towards something less physical and more abstract: the art of secrecy. Codes and ciphers had always existed. For centuries, rulers and generals had sought to disguise their words. Julius Caesar shifted letters by fixed amounts. Renaissance diplomats used complex substitution alphabets. Yet each system, given enough time, had been broken. Scourbius wondered if a machine might do better, if an electrical device, with moving parts, could create a cipher that changed constantly, one that no human hand or pencil could hope to keep up with. The key to his vision was a rotating wheel, or rotor, wired in such a way that pressing one letter on a keyboard would light up another. Each time a letter was pressed, the wheel would turn, changing the pathways, so that the next time the same key was struck, a different letter would appear. By stacking several of these rotors together, the number of possible combinations would multiply to staggering levels. In 1918, Scourbius applied for a patent. His idea was simple to describe, but revolutionary in practice. A cipher machine that used rotating wired wheels to transform text into an ever-changing secret code. This was the seed of the Enigma. At first, he did not think of armies and navies. He imagined businessmen. The world was opening up to international trade, and firms needed to send telegrams across borders. Confidentiality was valuable, whether for financial negotiations or for protecting contracts. The Enigma, he believed, would be the perfect product to sell, a mechanical safeguard against prying eyes. His company, Scourbius and Ritter, began developing and marketing the machine. Early models were bulky, housed in heavy cases, and powered by electricity. Demonstrations showed how a typed message could be transformed into meaningless strings of letters, then restored to clarity by anyone else with the same machine and the same rotor settings. But in business, timing is everything, and in the early 1920s, companies were cautious. The wounds of the war had not yet healed. Many firms were reluctant to spend money on something so unfamiliar. To many, the Enigma seemed overly complicated, a solution in search of a problem. Sales were few. Even as businessmen hesitated, another set of eyes began to notice. Militaries around the world, still licking their wounds, were preparing for the future. And secrecy, they knew, was as valuable in war as any weapon. It was the German Navy that first saw potential. Communications at sea were vulnerable. A fleet that could hide its intentions, that could maneuver without revealing its orders to the enemy, would have a tremendous advantage. The Enigma seemed to offer exactly that. By the mid-1920s, the German military began to adapt Scourbius's design. They added features, a plug board that allowed pairs of letters to be swapped, dramatically increasing complexity. They refined the rotors, creating standardized sets. They turned a commercial curiosity into a military instrument. Scourbius, for his part, saw his machine gain new life. But he would not live to see how far it would go. He died in 1929, in a carriage accident, his name largely unknown outside of technical circles. The device he left behind, however, was about to step onto the stage of world history. Picture Europe in the 1930s. Radio operators sat in cramped rooms, headphones pressed to their ears, jotting down streams of letters. Dots and dashes tapped through the ether, carrying orders, reports, and secrets. To anyone without the key, it was gibberish. But to those with an Enigma machine set to the right configuration, the nonsense resolved into meaning. The Germans believed it unbreakable. The sheer number of possible combinations, running into the trillions, seemed to place it beyond the reach of any codebreaker. Each day, the rotors could be reset, each message disguised anew. But whispers have a way of carrying farther than expected. In Warsaw, in Paris, in London, men and women leaned closer to the radio static and began to wonder. Could this machine, so carefully designed, truly be unbreakable? Or had Scorpius, in his quest for perfection, left a door ajar? And so, as we close this first chapter, we linger with the image of a small wooden box on a table. Its rotors gleam faintly, its keys wait to be pressed. It is silent now, but the sound it will make, the clack of keys, the faint click of turning wheels, the glow of letters lighting up, will echo across the years. The Enigma was more than a machine. It was a symbol of human ingenuity, of the desire to keep secrets, and of the belief that some locks can never be opened. But as history would soon show, even the strongest lock can yield to patience, persistence, and brilliance. In the chapters to come, we will step slowly into the minds of those who faced the Enigma, who studied its workings, and who sought the faint patterns hidden in the noise of war. The whisper of wires would grow into a roar, and the quiet machine on a desk would shape the fate of nations. Part 2. The Machine in the Box. The box itself was not extraordinary at first glance. It could sit easily on a table, its polished wood and brass fittings making it look almost like a portable typewriter or a compact cash register. To a casual observer, it might even appear ordinary. A lid lifted to reveal a keyboard with 26 keys, one for each letter of the alphabet. Above the keys, arranged in neat rows, was a set of small circular windows, each fitted with a tiny bulb and marked with a letter. A single press of a key would make one of these bulbs glow, but not the one you might expect. Press an A, and perhaps an L would light up. Press the A again, and perhaps a P would shine this time. The result seemed random, but behind the simple act of pressing a key lay the true heart of the device. Hidden inside were the rotors, discs of hard material, each fitted with electrical wiring that connected the 26 inputs on one side to 26 outputs on the other. The wiring was scrambled, different for every rotor, so that a signal entering at one point would emerge at another, transformed into a different letter. And the genius of the design was that each time a key was pressed, the rightmost rotor would shift forward by one notch, like the gear of a clock. The pathway of electricity was now altered. The same input letter, pressed again, would not follow the same route. With multiple rotors stacked together, the complexity multiplied, until the pattern of transformations became so vast that no human hand could hope to predict it. A reflector sat beyond the last rotor, looping the current back through the rotors again, forcing it to travel a new path and emerge on the other side. This meant that the Enigma was symmetrical. If one operator typed a message with a certain rotor arrangement, another operator with the same arrangement could type the resulting jumble of letters back into the machine and see the original words reappear. It was not simply encoding. It was a reversible transformation, like a lock and key contained in the same box. For the operators who used it each day, the machine was both familiar and mysterious. They knew the feel of the keys, the sound of the click as a rotor advanced, the small glow of a lamp above the keyboard. They carried the weight of the wooden case, set it on a table in a radio room or a field tent, and opened the lid with a sense of ritual. Yet what happened within the rotors was invisible, concealed by copper wires and careful engineering. They trusted the box without needing to understand its inner secrets. The true strength of the Enigma did not rest only in its design, but in the way it was used. Each day, the German forces issued a key sheet, a set of instructions that told operators how to arrange the machine, which rotors should be placed in which order, how they should be set, and which letters should be paired on the plug board. The plug board was a panel of sockets at the front of the machine, where pairs of letters could be linked with cables. If A and M were connected, pressing A might first be swapped to M before traveling through the rotors. This small addition expanded the complexity to staggering levels. The operators followed the key sheet with precision. They removed the rotors, placed them in the correct slots, aligned them to the prescribed positions, and inserted the plugboard cables according to the chart. Only then was the machine ready for use. Once set, it became the common language of secrecy. A message typed into one machine would appear as nonsense. Typed into another, configured the same way, the nonsense would transform back into sense. To those without the machine, or without the key sheet, the message was nothing more than a jumble of letters, impossible to understand. It is easy to imagine the daily life of a German radio operator. In a cramped submarine, deep beneath the waves, or in a field hut on the edge of a forest, the operator would sit at the small wooden box. The room would be filled with the smell of tobacco smoke, oil, and sweat. A voice on the wireless might send a coded message, and the operator would carefully copy down the stream of letters. Then, with steady hands, he would type them back into the Enigma, one by one, watching as bulbs lit up with the letters of the decoded text. The nonsense of the intercepted signal resolved into words, an order, a position, an instruction from high command. With these words, ships changed course, divisions moved, and lives were altered. For those outside the circle of secrecy, the task seemed hopeless. Imagine hearing the rhythm of Morse code, writing down strings like U, X, P, V, Q, L, T, and seeing only a meaningless storm of letters. There was no clue, no foothold, only an avalanche of possibilities. The Germans believed the avalanche to be too great to climb. They calculated that the number of possible settings, with multiple rotors, plugboard swaps, and daily changes, was in the order of trillions. Even if an enemy tried one setting per second, it would take longer than the lifetime of the universe to try them all. To the German command, the Enigma was a wall of iron, and they were secure behind it. But there was another truth hidden within that confidence. Complexity does not always mean invulnerability. The Enigma was only as secure as the discipline of those who used it. If a clerk made a mistake, if an operator repeated a message, if human routine left small patterns in the chaos, then the unbreakable wall might contain tiny cracks. And to the patient minds listening from the outside, those cracks might be enough. Yet for now, in the years before the great conflict erupted, the Enigma remained a mystery to all but those who held it in their hands. Soldiers, sailors, and airmen trusted the clack of its keys and the glow of its lamps. They believed their words were carried safely, hidden by mathematics too deep to fathom. They believed the machine in the box was unbreakable. As the 1930s wore on, messages crossed the airwaves in ever greater numbers. Orders to fleets, instructions to divisions, reports from occupied territories, all were cloaked in the strange, shifting code. To the Allies listening, the air grew crowded with whispers they could not yet understand. The small wooden box on a German desk was shaping the movements of armies, even as it appeared no more threatening than an office typewriter. But history has a way of favoring persistence. Somewhere, far from the German radio rooms, other men and women were beginning to ask questions. They too listened to the static, noted the patterns, and wondered about the device that lay behind the noise. The machine in the box was clever, yes, but perhaps not flawless. Perhaps even the strongest lock might one day find its key. And so, the Enigma continued to click and clatter, its rotors turning like the ticking of a clock that measured not only time but secrecy. Each press of a key was another layer of the great puzzle, another strand in the web of confusion that spread across Europe. The men who used it trusted that no one else could follow those strands. They believed that within the box lay safety, that the whisper of wires inside would always remain a whisper. Yet beyond the horizon, the patient work of others had already begun, and the silence of the lamps would not last forever. Part 3. The Illusion of Perfection. The men who carried the Enigma machine treated it with a kind of reverence. When the lid was opened and the rotors were placed carefully into their slots, it was as though a ritual was being performed. The operator pressed the first key, watched the small lamp glow, and believed he had in front of him a guardian of secrets. Each clack of a key and turn of a rotor seemed to push the words deeper into a labyrinth that no outsider could ever navigate. The Germans trusted this machine as one might trust a fortress wall, and they believed themselves secure within its shadow. What gave them this confidence was not only the design of the machine but the numbers that lay beneath it. Every rotor had 26 positions, and with 3 rotors in place the possible arrangements seemed enormous. But the Germans did not stop there. The order in which the rotors were placed could change, multiplying the combinations. The ring settings that shifted the internal wiring added still more variety. And on the front of the machine, a plug board created another layer of confusion by swapping pairs of letters. Each change increased the number of possibilities until the total reached into the realm of the unimaginable. The operators and commanders were told, and believed, that the Enigma had more possible configurations than there were grains of sand on a beach. They were told that if an enemy attempted to test each setting one by one, it would take not years or decades but millennia. They imagined their words protected by a mathematical wall so tall and wide that no human could ever climb it. This belief became not only a matter of calculation but of culture. To question the Enigma was to doubt the strength of the Reich itself, and few dared to question. For those sending messages each day, the machine was simply a tool. A weather report might be tapped out in the morning, a convoy order in the afternoon, a battlefield instruction at night. The operators trusted the code because they were told to trust it, and because every message that passed through the machine seemed to confirm its strength. When an order reached its destination intact, when an officer read words that only the intended recipient should know, the proof seemed plain enough. No intercepted messages had ever been read by the enemy. The silence of the Allies confirmed their security. To the German mind, the absence of evidence was evidence of invulnerability. But perfection is a dangerous illusion. The Enigma appeared flawless, yet like any creation of human hands, it carried the marks of imperfection. Its very structure, designed to multiply complexity, also created patterns. The reflector, which sent the signal back through the rotors, ensured that no letter could ever be encrypted as itself. This was a small detail, almost invisible in the storm of changing letters, but it was a pattern nonetheless. And patterns, however small, could be the seeds of weakness. There was also the matter of habit. Human beings are creatures of routine. Operators grew used to certain phrases, certain openings to their messages, certain ways of transmitting information. A weather report might always begin with the same word. A commander might favor the same phrases. These repetitions, innocent in themselves, were the cracks through which light could one day filter. The machine was strong, but those who used it were ordinary men, and ordinary men make mistakes. Even the procedures designed to protect the machine could betray it. Each day, the rotors were set according to a key sheet, and each operator was expected to follow this instruction with care. But men in the field were hurried, tired, or careless. Some forgot to change settings at the correct hour. Others repeated indicator sequences when they should not have. What was meant to be an unbreakable system became, under the pressure of war and human imperfection, something more fragile than the Germans wished to admit. Still, in those early years, the illusion held firm. The commanders believed their secrets safe. They pointed to the trillions of possible settings, the impossibility of brute force, and the silence of their enemies. They could not imagine that far away, across borders, quiet rooms were filled with men and women who listened patiently to their transmissions, copied their streams of nonsense letters, and began to search for the faint traces of order hidden within. The Allies, for their part, faced the Enigma with a mixture of awe and frustration. When the signals were first intercepted, the sheer volume of coded messages was overwhelming. Entire notebooks filled with meaningless strings of letters. To the untrained eye, they were as senseless as raindrops. But to those with the patience to look closely, the tiniest irregularities began to reveal themselves. If no letter could ever be itself, that was one clue. If certain combinations appeared more often than chance would suggest, that was another. The illusion of perfection was strong, but illusions are most dangerous when they convince their makers. The German officers at sea and in the air carried with them an almost unshakable faith in their machine. They believed it gave them the ability to move unseen, to strike without warning, to command without fear of interception. In the Battle of the Atlantic, U-boat captains sent back streams of reports, certain that their movements were invisible. They did not know that every repetition, every habit, every careless moment was being carefully collected, written down by listeners in distant huts, and stored for the day when those small cracks might be widened into a breach. For now, though, the fortress seemed intact. The rotors spun, the lamps glowed, and the words of generals and admirals traveled across Europe with the confidence of men who believed themselves invulnerable. The machine was admired not only as a tool but as a symbol of German engineering, precise and flawless. It became more than a box of wires and rotors. It was a talisman of certainty. In their belief that the Enigma could not be broken, the Germans revealed a deeper truth, that sometimes the strongest chains are forged not of metal but of conviction. And so the illusion held. Soldiers typed their reports, sailors transmitted their positions, airmen confirmed their orders. Each believed the letters spilling from the Enigma were safe. Yet beyond the borders of Germany, beyond the glow of the small bulbs, there were minds that did not accept the illusion. They believed that even the strongest fortress might hide a weak stone, and they were determined to find it. As we drift forward, we hold in our minds this image, a box of wood and brass, clacking in a submarine cabin, lighting up letters in a quiet office, resting on the lap of a soldier by lamplight. To its users, it was flawless. To history, it was a puzzle. And like all puzzles, it waited for the patient hand that would one day solve it. Part 4. Cracks in the armor. The illusion of invulnerability traveled with every Enigma machine. Operators believed it, commanders trusted it, and generals rested their strategies upon it. Yet the wider the use of the machine became, the more chances there were for small mistakes, and the more material there was for those who listened on the other side. The cracks in the armor were not obvious, nor were they easily exploited, but like faint lines across glass, they were there, waiting for the right pressure to make them widen. The first of these cracks came not from machines but from people. Human beings, bound to routine, left traces in their work. A weather station transmitting reports at the same time each day, beginning with the same phrases, created a rhythm. A commander who favored particular words or formulas planted seeds of predictability. In cryptography, predictability is both a curse and a blessing. A curse for those trying to create secrecy, a blessing for those trying to pierce it. The Germans also believed their procedures were flawless, but every layer of instruction created the possibility of error. Operators sometimes grew careless, repeating settings when they should not, or transmitting the same message more than once with only minor changes. In the press of duty, men cut corners. They sent routine words without realizing that routine was the enemy of secrecy. The strength of the machine was real, but it was not absolute. Beyond the borders of Germany, quiet rooms filled with radio operators were becoming archives of secrets not yet understood. From Warsaw to London, from Paris to small listening posts near the coasts, men and women recorded endless strings of letters. They did not know what the letters meant, but they sensed that the repetition itself contained meaning. If enough of these jumbled streams were collected, if enough paper was filled with them, then perhaps, one day, a pattern would rise to the surface. In Poland, this patience found a special form. The Cipher Bureau, a small team of mathematicians and cryptologists, listened with care to the German signals. They did not possess great machines, nor vast resources, but they had a determination rooted in necessity. Poland, lying directly in the path of German ambition, could not afford complacency. Every German message intercepted was treated as a clue in a puzzle that might one day decide the fate of the nation. The cracks in the armor were also revealed by captured material. When documents fell into Allied hands, whether through espionage or chance, they provided hints about the procedures. A careless officer might carry notes that should have been destroyed. A codebook might be left behind in a hurried retreat. Each scrap of paper was another small chip in the wall of secrecy. The Germans, confident in the strength of the Enigma itself, underestimated the weakness of human discipline. There was also something deeper at play, something almost invisible but quietly persistent. The design of the Enigma ensured that no letter could ever be encrypted as itself. This meant that in every message, no matter how long or how complex, one kind of pairing could be ruled out. To the untrained eye, it was meaningless. To the patient cryptographer, it was a rare fixed point in a shifting landscape, like a star in a cloudy night sky. For those who believed in the perfection of the machine, such small details seemed irrelevant. To those who watched from outside, they were the beginnings of opportunity. The operators in their cramped radio rooms could not know that somewhere far away, in a quiet Polish office, young men with chalkboards and notebooks were already sketching the outlines of possibility. It is important to imagine the contrast. On one side, a German submarine crew huddled in the dim glow of red lamps, confident that their position reports could never be read. On the other side, in a land that felt perpetually threatened, Polish mathematicians worked late into the night, staring at numbers, tracing permutations, searching for the order hidden in chaos. One side believed in armor without cracks. The other side believed that no armor is perfect. The cracks were still faint, but faint cracks have a way of widening when enough pressure is applied. The German belief in invulnerability led to complacency. Procedures were enforced but not always obeyed. Operators grew careless, commanders trusted too deeply, and the very overuse of the Enigma increased the chances that patterns would slip through. Every message transmitted was another stone laid in the wall, but it was also another chance for a flaw to reveal itself. The Allies could not yet see the full picture. To them, the Enigma was still a fortress, still a riddle beyond reach. But the accumulation of mistakes, the weight of repetition, and the small but constant flow of captured material were beginning to shift the balance. The armor was not as seamless as it appeared. The day would come when the right minds, given enough material, would step through those cracks and find themselves inside the fortress. For now, though, the story remains one of shadows. The Germans typed their messages with confidence, and the Allies listened with frustration. The whispers filled the airwaves, a constant murmur of secrets passing overhead. The cracks were present, but they were not yet breaches. It would take brilliance, patience, and courage to widen them. The time was coming when the Enigma would face its first true challengers. And so we end this chapter with the image of two worlds. In one, German officers sit secure behind the glow of their machines, trusting in numbers they believe infinite. In the other, quiet mathematicians gather streams of nonsense letters, convinced that even infinite numbers can be tamed by reason. Between them lies the Enigma, a machine that seemed perfect, and the faint but growing truth that perfection is only an illusion. Part 5. Poland's Secret Mathematicians. In the years after the First World War, Poland stood as a nation reborn, carved once more onto the map after more than a century of partition. But its rebirth was fragile. It was hemmed in by powerful neighbors, Germany to the west, the Soviet Union to the east, and each day felt like a reminder that survival would depend not only on armies and weapons, but also on foresight. In Warsaw, the Polish General Staff understood that information could be as valuable as artillery. They knew that in the new age of wireless communication, secrets floated invisibly through the air, and whoever could listen and understand them would hold an advantage. German signals filled the airwaves. At first they seemed impenetrable, a relentless flood of jumbled letters carried by Morse code, nonsense spilling into notebooks. But the Poles were determined. They did not have the resources of Britain or France, nor the industrial power of their neighbors. What they did have was a strong tradition of mathematics, a culture of rigorous training, and the belief that pure reason might succeed where brute force could not. Into this world stepped a young mathematician named Marian Rejewski. Born in 1905, he was part of a generation shaped by both the struggle for Polish independence and the excitement of new science. His talent for mathematics was clear from an early age, and at the University of Poznan he excelled in algebra, the study of patterns and permutations. When the Polish Cipher Bureau sought to recruit fresh minds for its code-breaking school, Rejewski was among those chosen. He and a handful of other gifted young mathematicians, Jerzy Rosicki and Henryk Zygalski among them, were brought into a world of secrecy. They were told little at first, only that their work would involve the German ciphers. But it was enough to awaken their determination. The task before them seemed impossible. The Enigma was not like the old ciphers of shifting alphabets or substitution tables. It was a machine, alive with moving parts, capable of producing billions upon billions of different combinations. The Germans believed it was unbreakable. Many in the intelligence services of other nations had quietly agreed. But the Polish team approached it not as a mystery to despair over, but as a mathematical structure to be analyzed. To them, the nonsense letters were not noise. They were the output of a function, a process that could be studied and understood. Rejewski brought to the problem the tools of algebra and group theory. He began to imagine the rotors not as physical disks but as permutations, mappings from one set of letters to another. By representing the machine as a chain of mathematical transformations, he could strip away the wood, brass, and wiring and see it as a set of rules. What others saw as a jumble, he saw as structure. Slowly, patiently, he mapped the ways in which signals might travel, the constraints imposed by the reflector, and the patterns that emerged when messages were repeated. It was not easy work. He and his colleagues spent long nights in rooms filled with papers, chalkboards covered in equations, and tables littered with intercepted messages. Every morning new German signals arrived, and every evening new attempts were made to untangle them. They invented tools to help. One of these was the cyclometer, a device designed to catalog the cycles of permutations produced by different rotor settings. By constructing tables of these cycles, they could begin to reduce the vast universe of possibilities into something more manageable. Henryk Zygalski developed another tool, a set of perforated sheets of paper later called the Zygalski sheets. Each sheet represented possible rotor settings, with holes punched where patterns aligned. By layering these sheets and shining light through them, he could eliminate impossible settings and narrow down the search. It was painstaking, requiring patience and meticulous organization, but it transformed the work from guesswork into method. Jerzy Rosicki contributed his own insights, developing techniques that relied on the repetition of certain message keys. German procedures often required operators to send a message key twice, encrypted each time, and this redundancy created weaknesses. Where the Germans thought they had added security, they had instead left an opening. Together, these young mathematicians formed a team unlike any other in Europe. They did not boast or seek recognition. They worked quietly, driven by necessity, their lives unfolding in the shadow of the machine they sought to defeat. Each breakthrough was modest: a table completed, a sheet prepared, a small pattern understood, but each step brought them closer to piercing the veil of secrecy. The Germans did not know that in Warsaw their confidence was being eroded day by day. They believed that their procedures were strict and their machine unassailable. Yet in a small office, men barely into their 30s were proving otherwise with nothing more than paper, pencils, and determination. It was a contest between arrogance and patience, between the illusion of perfection and the persistence of reason. By the late 1930s, the Polish Cipher Bureau had achieved what many thought impossible. They could, with effort, break Enigma traffic. They had built their own replicas of the machine, constructed from analysis and deduction, and with these they could read German messages. It was not always quick, and it required constant adaptation as the Germans changed their procedures, but it was a victory nonetheless. For the first time, the fortress of Enigma had been breached. Yet even as they achieved this triumph, the shadow of war lengthened. Germany grew more aggressive, its voice louder in Europe, its ambitions clearer. The Poles knew that they could not stand alone. Their work, as brilliant as it was, would not be enough to face the storm that was coming. In 1939, only weeks before the outbreak of war, they made a decision that would change history. They invited representatives from Britain and France to Warsaw and shared their secrets. They gave away not only their methods but also replicas of the machine itself. They did so not for glory, but because survival demanded it. It is hard to imagine the courage of that choice. To reveal the fruits of years of secret labor to foreign powers required trust and humility. The Poles knew that if war came, their country might be overrun. Better that their work live on elsewhere, better that others carry the torch forward, than that it be extinguished in the chaos of invasion. And so, in a quiet room, papers were laid out, machines displayed, and secrets passed from hand to hand. The torch was passed to Britain and France, and soon to the world. The story of the Polish mathematicians is not as well known as that of the British codebreakers who followed, yet without them the later victories might never have been possible. Their patience, their brilliance, and their willingness to see patterns where others saw only chaos were the first real cracks in the armor of Enigma. They were the ones who proved that the unbreakable could be broken. As we drift toward the next chapter of this story, we hold in our minds the image of three young men bent over papers in a Warsaw office. Outside, the world prepared for war. Inside, numbers and letters danced across chalkboards, and the quiet determination of mathematics reshaped the fate of nations. The cracks in the armor were no longer faint lines. They were openings, and through them the light of possibility had begun to shine. Part 6. Passing the Torch. The summer of 1939 carried a heaviness in the air. Across Europe, the drums of war grew louder with each passing month. Germany had already absorbed Austria and Czechoslovakia, and its eyes turned with increasing boldness toward Poland. In Warsaw, the mathematicians of the Cipher Bureau continued their quiet work, but they knew that time was running out. Their nation stood directly in the path of German ambition, and the shadow that loomed over them grew longer each day. The small group of codebreakers, Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Rosicki, and Henryk Zygalski, had already accomplished the impossible. They had looked into the heart of the Enigma and understood its rhythms. Through mathematics, patience, and ingenuity, they had constructed replicas of the machine itself. With these they could read German messages, though the work was always delicate and demanded constant adaptation. It was a triumph for Poland, but triumph alone was not enough. They were painfully aware that when war came, their nation might be overwhelmed. What use would their secrets be if Poland itself were silenced? In July of that year, representatives from Britain and France traveled quietly to Warsaw. They came not with fanfare but in secrecy, summoned by the Polish General Staff to a meeting that would alter the course of the coming war. The Poles had guarded their work jealously for years, reluctant to share what little advantage they possessed. But now the situation demanded a new choice. If Germany invaded, Poland might not survive long enough to continue the struggle alone. Better to pass on the knowledge while there was still time, better to let others carry the work forward. The meeting was held in a nondescript building, its walls as plain as any government office. Inside, however, something extraordinary was revealed. The British and French visitors were shown tables of permutations, stacks of papers, and, most astonishingly, machines. The Poles unveiled the replicas they had constructed, Enigma machines built not from captured devices but from pure deduction. Every wire, every rotor, every connection had been reconstructed through analysis. To the visitors, it was as if a curtain had been pulled back. Where before they had seen only an unbreakable wall, now they saw a pathway through it. The British, in particular, were astonished. For years their own cryptographers had wrestled with the Enigma and had made little progress. They had believed the problem nearly hopeless, a mathematical wilderness too vast to navigate. And here, in Warsaw, young mathematicians working with modest resources had achieved a breakthrough that Britain's own larger and better-funded service had not. It was a moment of both humility and relief. The French too recognized the magnitude of what they were being given. They had provided Poland with some captured documents earlier, material obtained through espionage, but they had not realized how effectively the Poles had used it. Now, the circle of secrecy widened, and what had once been the quiet labor of a handful of men became the shared responsibility of nations. The Poles did not offer their secrets grudgingly. They explained their methods patiently, laying out the mathematical reasoning, demonstrating the Zygalski sheets, and showing how the cyclometer had been used to create catalogues of rotor behavior. They explained the procedures, the weaknesses in German habits, and the vulnerabilities that could be exploited. It was not simply information they gave, but understanding. And then, perhaps the most precious gift of all, they handed over two of their replica machines, physical embodiments of years of work. For the British and French, holding these replicas was like receiving keys to a vault thought forever locked. They carried them back across borders with care, knowing that what they held could alter the course of history. The decision to share was not made lightly. For the Polish cryptographers, it meant surrendering the fruits of their most secret labor. It meant acknowledging that their nation might soon be unable to protect the knowledge it had nurtured. But it also meant hope. If Poland fell, then at least their work would live on elsewhere. The struggle against Germany would continue, and the Enigma would not remain unchallenged. Only weeks later, their fears were realized. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland from the west, and soon after, the Soviet Union invaded from the east. The country was crushed between two giants. The Cipher Bureau itself was evacuated, its members scattering to continue their work in exile. Jerzy Rosicki would later die tragically in a shipwreck in 1942, his brilliant mind lost to the war. Rejewski and Zygalski would survive, though their later years were marked by hardship. Yet their contributions had already ensured that the story would not end with Poland's defeat. For in Britain, at a place called Bletchley Park, the torch had been taken up. The information and machines handed over in that quiet Warsaw meeting became the foundation upon which the British would build. There, Alan Turing, Gordon Welshman, and many others would expand upon the Polish breakthroughs, developing new machines, new methods, and a vast organization devoted to the task. The gift of the Poles became the seed from which the great orchard of Allied codebreaking would grow. It is easy, in hindsight, to underestimate the significance of that summer meeting. History often remembers the more visible chapters: the British bombers, Turing's genius, the triumphs at Bletchley Park. But none of it would have been possible without the courage of the Poles to share their work at the very brink of destruction. They knew they might lose their country, but they refused to let their knowledge be lost with it. Imagine, for a moment, the scene as the visitors left Warsaw, carrying the secrets in their hands. The city bustled as it always had, its streets alive with merchants and carriages, with students hurrying across squares, with families strolling in the evening light. Yet above the ordinary life of the city hung the shadow of invasion. Few could have guessed that within government offices, machines had been handed over that would play a role in deciding the fate of the coming conflict. Few could have known that the quiet decision of a handful of mathematicians would echo across the world. The passing of the torch was not a moment of glory but of solemn necessity. It was done not with speeches or fanfare, but with the steady resolve of men who understood what was at stake. They had pierced the armor of the Enigma, and now they entrusted others to widen the breach. Their work was no longer theirs alone. It belonged to all who would resist the tide of tyranny. As we let this chapter settle, we picture the replica machines being carried carefully across borders, the papers folded and stored, the minds of British and French officers alive with new possibilities. We picture also the Polish mathematicians, weary but resolute, watching as their secrets left their hands. They had done what they could. The rest would be left to others. The torch had been passed. The light that flickered in Warsaw would soon burn brightly at Bletchley Park. And from there, it would guide the struggle against the Enigma into its next, most decisive phase. Part 7. The Huts of Bletchley Park. North of London, in the quiet English countryside, stood an estate that seemed, at first glance, unremarkable. It was called Bletchley Park, a Victorian mansion with gardens, stables, and a modest lake. Once it had been the home of wealthy owners, but by the time war came, it was something else entirely. Its gates, guarded and discreet, hid a secret world. Behind those gates, some of the brightest minds in Britain gathered to do work that could not be spoken of outside. The estate became a small village of secrecy. Wooden huts were built hastily around the mansion, each one assigned to a different task. To a casual observer, they were nothing more than simple sheds, but within them history was being shaped. The huts smelled of tobacco smoke, ink, and damp wood. Inside, men and women bent over tables covered with papers, typewriters clicked, and chalk squeaked across blackboards. In one hut, messages arrived by the hundreds, streams of intercepted German traffic carried by wireless from listening stations scattered across Britain. In another hut, translators labored to turn raw fragments of German into something more useful. And in still others, mathematicians and engineers wrestled with the Enigma itself. The work was relentless. Day and night, the huts buzzed with activity. Couriers carried papers between rooms, clerks filed and sorted, and young women typed tirelessly to keep pace with the flood of intercepted signals. Yet amid the hum of routine there was also an air of quiet intensity. Every letter mattered, every pattern could hold the key to lives saved or lost. Among the minds gathered at Bletchley, one would later become most famous, Alan Turing. Tall, shy, and awkward in manner, Turing was not the image of a conventional officer or leader. He was a mathematician, drawn to puzzles, fascinated by logic and machines. His mind moved in leaps that others sometimes struggled to follow, but his vision was clear. He believed that the problem of the Enigma was not hopeless, and that with the right approach it could be mastered. Turing did not work alone. Gordon Welshman, another mathematician, brought his own brilliance to the task, particularly in refining organizational methods that would allow the flood of signals to be processed effectively. Dilly Knox, a veteran codebreaker from the First World War, worked tirelessly with his team of women assistants, poring over messages letter by letter. Hugh Alexander, a chess champion, lent his gift for strategy to the battle of wits against the machine. Together they formed a community of minds, different in temperament and background but united in purpose. The huts were divided by function, but the boundaries were porous. People moved between them, exchanging ideas in hurried conversations over cups of tea, chalking notes on walls, or scribbling equations on scraps of paper. The pace was frantic, but there was also camaraderie. Those who worked at Bletchley remembered later the sense of being part of something larger than themselves, of carrying a burden that few outside could even imagine. Life at Bletchley was far from glamorous. The huts were drafty in winter, hot in summer, and always crowded. The hours were long, with shifts that blurred day into night. Meals were taken quickly, conversations were often half-finished, and leisure was scarce. Yet despite the discomfort, morale was high. Many were young, pulled from universities and offices into a secret war they could not discuss even with their families. They wrote letters home filled with careful vagueness, never revealing the true nature of their work. Silence was a duty, secrecy a second skin. At the center of it all was the Enigma. Messages arrived by the hundreds, each one a string of letters without meaning. They were sorted, analyzed, and compared, in search of patterns that might offer a foothold. The work was tedious, requiring patience and meticulous attention, but in the midst of the routine there were flashes of revelation. A repeated phrase, a careless operator, a predictable weather report. These were the crumbs that could lead to breakthroughs. The British had inherited the torch from Poland, and they built upon it with determination. The replica machines provided by the Poles were studied closely, and new ones were built to expand the effort. The methods described in Warsaw were refined, adapted to the changing German procedures. And alongside the mathematical work came the recognition that machines would be needed to fight machines. Turing and Welshman began to design an electromechanical device that could test rotor settings at a speed no human could match. This machine, soon to be known as the bombe, would become the beating heart of Bletchley's efforts. But in these early days, before the bombers were fully operational, the huts relied on human ingenuity above all. Nights stretched into mornings, papers piled high, and chalkboards filled with tangled notations. The people of Bletchley lived in a rhythm of secrecy and exhaustion. Yet they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that behind every message lay decisions of life and death. A decoded order could reroute a convoy, save a ship, prevent an ambush. Each breakthrough, however small, was a victory in a war fought in shadows. There were moments of doubt. The Germans continued to strengthen their procedures, adding rotors, tightening discipline. At times it seemed the problem grew faster than the solutions. Yet Bletchley endured. What they lacked in comfort they made up for in determination. The estate, once quiet and ordinary, became a hive of secret purpose, each hut a cell in the great organism of intelligence. It is worth pausing to imagine a single evening at Bletchley Park. The sun has set, and the grounds lie in darkness, the mansion looming silently at the center. In the huts, lamps glow dimly through windows. Inside, young women in uniforms sit at typewriters, their fingers flying across keys. Mathematicians lean over chalkboards, tracing patterns, arguing quietly, drinking lukewarm tea from tin cups. Somewhere a wireless set crackles with the arrival of new messages, and a clerk hurries to deliver them to the next hut. The air smells of paper, ink, and damp wool. Outside, a guard patrols the path, unaware of the equations and dreams unfolding just beyond the walls. Bletchley Park was more than a place, it was a world apart. Those who entered its gates stepped into a life of secrecy and silence, a life where the outside world receded and only the battle of codes remained. To those who lived it, it was exhausting, consuming, and unforgettable. To the world beyond, it was invisible. As the war deepened, the work of the huts grew ever more vital. The Germans moved their armies, their fleets, their U-boats, all guided by messages cloaked in Enigma. And in the huts of Bletchley, a small community of minds fought back with chalk, wires, and willpower. The fortress of Enigma had been breached by the Poles. At Bletchley, the breach would be widened into a gateway. The huts would become the crucible where secrecy was undone, where mathematics became weapon, and where quiet persistence helped turn the tide of history. And so we leave this chapter with the image of those huts, plain wooden structures on the grounds of an English estate. Within them, ordinary people performed extraordinary work, tapping out the rhythm of secrecy and revelation. Each night, the keys clacked, the rotors turned, and the lights glowed faintly against the dark. In those huts, the war of words and wires was fought, and the future began to tilt. Part 8. The Bombe Awakens. The huts at Bletchley Park had been alive with the scratch of pencils and the shuffle of papers. But there came a moment when the sheer volume of messages overwhelmed even the most dedicated minds. Each day brought thousands of intercepted signals, each one a puzzle locked by Enigma. Human patience and skill alone could not keep pace. If the work was to succeed, if the fortress of German secrecy was to be breached fully and decisively, then machines would be needed to fight machines. It was Alan Turing who gave this idea its clearest shape. Turing had always thought differently from others. To him, the Enigma was not simply a box of rotors but a logical system, a set of transformations that could be modeled and tested. He imagined ways of stripping the problem down, of harnessing mechanical speed to do what human brains could not. He took the Polish breakthroughs, the insight that the machine could be represented mathematically, that patterns could be traced, and asked how they might be carried further. If the Poles had catalogued the possibilities by hand, might not a larger machine perform the same labor on a scale beyond human reach? The idea became the bomb. It was not a bomb in the destructive sense, but a great electromechanical device, its rows of drums spinning like the barrels of some enormous organ. Each drum represented a rotor, and together they simulated countless possible settings of the Enigma. Wires and switches connected the drums, relays clicked, and as the drums turned, they tested combinations at a pace that no human could match. Where a person with paper might take weeks, the bomb could race through possibilities in hours. The first bomb was installed in 1940, and it filled a room with its presence. It was tall, heavy, and loud, the hum of motors and the clatter of relays filling the hut where it stood. Operators tended it carefully, adjusting settings, feeding in hypotheses, and waiting for the machine to stop. When it did, it pointed toward rotor settings that might unlock the German messages for that day. It did not provide answers directly but narrowed the search, reducing the ocean of possibilities to a manageable pool. From there, human cryptographers could test and confirm. The work around the bomb was as much art as science. It required what the codebreakers called cribs, educated guesses about what parts of a message might contain. A weather report that always began with the same word, a routine phrase in a naval order, a repeated opening or signature, these were the footholds. By assuming a fragment of plaintext, the bomb could test whether a set of rotor positions was consistent with it. When the machine stopped, there was a chance that the door had been unlocked. The operators of the bomb were often young women, members of the Women's Royal Naval Service. They stood beside the great machines, listening to the noise, watching the spinning drums, resetting cables, and recording results. The work was exhausting, the hours long, but they performed it with discipline and care. The rows of bombers, standing side by side in their huts, became the pulse of Bletchley Park, their clatter a constant reminder that the battle of codes never ceased. The arrival of the bombers transformed the scale of the work. Where once only a fraction of German traffic could be tackled, now vast numbers of messages could be brought within reach. Each successful run meant new insights into German operations, new chances to anticipate movements, new opportunities to save lives. The codebreakers began to see not just fragments but whole pictures. Convoy routes, submarine positions, army orders. The secrets of the enemy unfolded letter by letter, unlocked by the dance of drums and relays. It is easy to imagine the moment when a breakthrough came. A clerk hurrying with fresh intercepts, a cryptographer suggesting a crib, the bomb spinning noisily through the night. Then, suddenly, the machine stops, a small lamp glows, and the operator writes down the result. In another hut, men test the settings on replica Enigmas, and slowly, words emerge from the nonsense. A cheer rises, subdued but heartfelt. Another message has been broken, another glimpse into the enemy's mind achieved. Turing himself did not seek glory in these moments. He was quiet, almost absent-minded, wandering the grounds in his own thoughts, sometimes with a mug of tea, sometimes with scraps of paper filled with equations. Yet his vision had made the difference. The bomb was his answer to the scale of the problem, his way of turning abstract mathematics into practical salvation. His mind ranged far ahead, but in the huts of Bletchley, his ideas became solid metal, wires, and drums that clattered day and night. The bombers did not end the struggle. The Germans continued to refine their procedures, adding rotors, changing indicators, tightening discipline. Each new complication demanded adjustments, and the bombers themselves had to evolve. But the principle held: machines could fight machines, and logic could tame complexity. Where the Germans believed themselves safe in the fortress of their numbers, the bombers proved that speed, patience, and ingenuity could breach the walls. Life at Bletchley was still difficult. The huts remained crowded, the hours long, the secrecy total. Those who tended the bombers rarely knew what the messages contained, only that their work was vital. They returned to billets in nearby towns, wrote vague letters to families, and came back each day to the noise and heat of the machines. They endured the monotony because they believed, quietly, that their work mattered. They could not see the convoys saved, the battles shaped, the lives spared, but they trusted that somewhere, far away, the fruits of their labor were felt. And indeed, they were. Naval officers steering convoys across the Atlantic, unaware of how the enemy's submarines had been anticipated. Commanders planning operations with confidence, unaware of how much of the German order of battle was known. Pilots flying missions with better odds, soldiers spared ambushes, civilians protected from attacks, all benefited from the unseen hands at Bletchley and the relentless work of the bombers. The machines themselves became symbols of persistence. They were not graceful or elegant, but they were dependable, grinding through possibility after possibility without rest. They were the mechanical heartbeat of the secret war, pounding away in rhythm with the determination of those who built and tended them. Each bomb was a bridge between the abstract world of logic and the concrete needs of survival. As we drift toward the close of this chapter, we picture the rows of bombers in their huts, drums spinning, relays clicking, operators moving among them with practiced motions. Outside, the night air of the English countryside is cool and still, the stars above unaware of the struggle below. Inside, the machines thunder on, their noise filling the small wooden huts with a rhythm of resistance. In those sounds lay the promise that the fortress of Enigma would not hold forever. The bomb had awakened, and with it, a new phase of the struggle had begun. Part 9. The Battle of the Atlantic. The ocean was the true stage upon which the struggle with Enigma became a matter of survival. Across the Atlantic, ships carried not only goods but hope itself. Food, fuel, weapons, and soldiers crossed from North America to Britain, lifelines without which the island nation could not endure. To cut those lifelines, the German Navy turned to its submarines, the U-boats, prowling beneath the waves like silent predators. The battle between convoys and U-boats was not only a contest of ships and torpedoes but of messages and codes. Every course change, every hunting ground, every rendezvous was planned through Enigma. On the decks of those submarines, cramped and damp, the Enigma machine was as essential as the periscope. Operators hunched over the wooden box, the glow of its lamps flickering in the dim light, typing out position reports and orders. These signals leapt invisibly into the air, caught by German command centers, relayed to other U-boats, and used to coordinate wolf packs that stalked the convoys. To the German commanders, the code was a cloak, hiding their submarines from the eyes of the enemy. To the sailors of Britain and its allies, the cloak was deadly. Convoys were assembled in long, vulnerable lines, merchant ships guarded by escorts. They crept across the ocean under constant threat, their crews scanning the waves for the faint silhouette of a periscope, listening for the sudden roar of an explosion. Every successful interception by U-boats meant lives lost and supplies sunk into the deep. For Britain, it was a slow strangulation, a danger as great as any army on land. If the convoys failed, Britain could starve, and the war might be lost without a single invasion. Inside the huts of Bletchley Park, this reality was never far from the minds of those working on Enigma. Each time a bomb rattled through the night, each time a crib suggested a possible breakthrough, the urgency of the Atlantic weighed heavily. To break naval Enigma, to read the U-boat signals, was not an abstract triumph. It was the difference between a convoy making landfall or disappearing beneath the waves. Yet naval Enigma proved the most stubborn. The Germans recognized the importance of secrecy at sea and tightened procedures. They added rotors to the machines used by the Navy, increasing the complexity. They enforced stricter discipline among their operators. For a time, it seemed that the codebreakers at Bletchley could not keep pace. Messages arrived faster than they could be broken, and often, by the time the contents were revealed, the information was already too late to use. The struggle became a race between adaptation and despair. To gain the upper hand, the Allies needed not only the logic of mathematics but also the luck of capture. Boarding parties risked their lives to seize codebooks from sinking submarines. Whether ships taken by force yielded valuable materials. Each scrap of German procedure captured gave the cryptographers a new foothold. These daring seizures, carried out in the cold spray of the North Atlantic, fed directly into the quiet rooms of Bletchley, where papers were studied with feverish attention. It was a strange alliance of courage and calculation. Sailors braved enemy fire to capture codebooks, while mathematicians bent over equations to make sense of them. Neither side could have succeeded without the other. The ocean and the chalkboard, the torpedo and the crib, all played their roles in the great contest. Slowly, progress came. With the help of captured materials and the relentless work of the bombers, the codebreakers began to read naval Enigma more quickly. They learned the routes of the U-boats, the timing of wolf-pack attacks, the coordinates of ambushes. This knowledge was passed carefully to naval commanders, who could then reroute convoys, strengthen escorts, and prepare traps of their own. For the first time, the hunters became the hunted. Imagine the relief of a convoy commander who, instead of sailing blindly into the ocean, now had the benefit of invisible guidance. Orders came to adjust course, to alter speed, to avoid a particular patch of sea. He did not know that the information came from broken Enigma codes, only that it saved his ships from danger. The sailors on the merchant vessels, weary and anxious, did not know that their lives had been spared by the clatter of bombers in distant huts. To them, survival was a matter of luck. In truth, it was the fruit of secrecy undone. The battle raged for years, with losses on both sides. German U-boats claimed thousands of ships, their victories cheered in Berlin. But as the Allies improved their code-breaking, the tide slowly turned. Wolf packs that once struck with devastating effect found themselves evaded or ambushed. U-boat captains began to sense that the enemy knew too much, that their cloak of secrecy was fraying. They did not yet suspect the true cause, but unease grew among them. At Bletchley, the work never ceased. New rotors introduced by the Germans meant new challenges. Shifts grew longer, bombers ran hotter, and the strain on operators increased. Yet the determination did not falter. Each successful decryption was another step toward keeping the lifeline across the Atlantic open. Each convoy that arrived safely in port was a victory unseen, uncelebrated, but vital. The Battle of the Atlantic was not won in a single moment but in countless small triumphs. A message broken in time, a convoy rerouted, a submarine avoided. Day after day, night after night, the work of Bletchley and the bravery of sailors combined to hold back the German threat. In the quiet of the huts, the clatter of the bombers was answered by the silence of ships arriving safely in harbor. As the years passed, the balance shifted. Allied convoys grew stronger, air patrols extended their reach, and U-boat losses mounted. By 1943, the tide had turned decisively. The Atlantic lifeline, though still threatened, was secure enough that Britain could breathe easier. And behind this turning of the tide lay the hidden hand of broken Enigma. We close this chapter by picturing the two worlds once more. Beneath the waves, a U-boat crew crouches in silence, confident in the cloak of their coded messages. Above the waves, a convoy of merchant ships steams through the grey ocean, unaware that danger has been averted. And far away, in the English countryside, a bomb machine rattles to a stop, its operators leaning in to record the settings it has revealed. Three worlds, bound by invisible signals, their fates intertwined. The Battle of the Atlantic was a battle of steel and blood, but it was also a battle of letters and wires. And in that battle, the quiet persistence of codebreakers helped ensure that the lifeline of the ocean endured. Part 10. Secrecy Above All. The great paradox of Enigma was that breaking it was only the beginning. The cracked messages, once revealed by the bombers and the patient minds at Bletchley Park, were filled with life and death information. They spoke of troop movements, naval patrols, bombing raids, and supply convoys. Each one was a thread that, if pulled too openly, might unravel the secret. For those who held the knowledge, the hardest task was not decoding the messages but deciding what to do with them. At Bletchley Park, the results of a successful decryption were not broadcast across the huts or celebrated with champagne. They were quietly written down, filed, and sent by courier through a chain of secrecy. The intelligence bore a single code name, Ultra. Those who saw it were told to treat it as if it were the most delicate glass, too precious to be handled carelessly. Ultra was not merely information. It was a secret about secrets. If the Germans discovered that Enigma had been broken, they would change their systems, add rotors, tighten discipline further, and the window might close forever. This created a terrible dilemma. The codebreakers could reveal where U-boats lurked or when an air raid would fall, but acting on that knowledge too directly risked giving away the truth. If a convoy turned aside every time a wolf pack lay in wait, the Germans might grow suspicious. If an airfield braced for attack before bombers arrived, the enemy might wonder how their plans were known. To use Ultra was to walk a knife's edge, enough action to save lives, but not so much that the Germans saw the pattern. Decisions of this kind were not made lightly. High Command created elaborate cover stories, pretending that intelligence had come from other sources. A reconnaissance plane might be dispatched to happen across a submarine just before a convoy changed course. A spy report might be invented to explain why a city was prepared for a raid. Deception became the cloak for the truth. The Germans, watching from their side, saw only a world of chance and misfortune. They did not realize that behind the curtain, their own messages were being read. Still, the weight of secrecy pressed heavily. Those who worked at Bletchley did not choose which messages to act upon. Their role ended when the letters became words. Others, in offices far removed from the huts, decided whether to intervene. Sometimes, painfully, they chose not to. A convoy was left on its course, even though its doom was known. Soldiers marched into ambushes that could have been prevented. The sacrifice of some was deemed necessary to protect the larger secret. It was a cold calculus, but in war, such calculations were made. For the men and women at Bletchley, there was both relief and sorrow in this arrangement. They were spared the agony of choice, yet they knew their work sometimes revealed disasters that could not be stopped. They wrote the decrypts, passed them along, and turned back to the next message. Their burden was to persist, to provide clarity even when clarity brought no comfort. The secrecy around Ultra extended beyond strategy. Even those who used the intelligence often did not know its true source. Commanders in the field were given orders that seemed to come from higher authorities. They did not realize those orders were shaped by messages intercepted from the enemy. Only a handful of leaders at the very top were fully aware of Ultra's existence. To reveal it to many was too great a risk. Silence was the only safeguard. This silence was so complete that after the war, many veterans of Bletchley Park returned to ordinary lives without ever speaking of what they had done. For decades, the story of Ultra remained hidden, locked away in archives, unmentioned even among friends. Those who had broken the most famous code in history carried the secret quietly, their memories unshared, their triumphs unrecognized. It was not until the 1970s that the full story began to emerge, and only then did the world realize the magnitude of what had been achieved. But in the midst of the war, secrecy was everything. Ultra was powerful precisely because it was invisible. To preserve it, sacrifices had to be made, not only on the battlefield but in the hearts of those who bore the knowledge. They lived with the quiet torment of knowing what might come and being powerless to change it. Yet they endured, because the alternative, the loss of the secret itself, would have been catastrophic. Imagine the tension in a room where such decisions were made. A decoded message lies on the table, its words stark and clear, a convoy marked for destruction, an air raid scheduled for dawn. Around the table sit officers and ministers, weighing options. If they act, lives may be saved, but suspicion may be aroused. If they do nothing, lives may be lost, but the secret remains safe. The silence in that room is heavy, broken only by the ticking of a clock. Finally, a decision is made, and the paper is folded, filed, and locked away. Outside, the world moves on, unaware of the invisible battle being fought over every choice. The moral weight of Ultra was immense. It was not simply a question of intelligence, but of conscience. To know and not to act is a burden few can carry easily. Yet those at the highest levels bore it, convinced that in the balance of war, secrecy was as valuable as steel. They trusted that by preserving Ultra, they were saving more lives in the long run, shortening the war, and securing eventual victory. At Bletchley Park, the work continued without pause. The operators tended the bombers, the mathematicians traced patterns, the clerks typed, the couriers carried. Each day was the same rhythm: intercept, decode, deliver. They did not see the larger debates, nor did they hear the justifications. Their task was endless and absorbing enough. Perhaps it was better that way. To know too much would have been unbearable. The story of Ultra is one of triumph shadowed by restraint. The codebreakers achieved what seemed impossible, but the true brilliance lay not only in breaking the code but in keeping the secret of its breaking. That secrecy demanded discipline, patience, and sometimes a cruel acceptance of loss. It was a war fought in silence, where victories could not be celebrated and tragedies could not be prevented. As this chapter draws to a close, we imagine once again the quiet of Bletchley Park at night. The huts glow softly under blackout curtains, the bombers rattle in their huts, and somewhere a courier carries a small envelope marked with the highest secrecy. Inside that envelope lies knowledge that could save lives, or knowledge that must remain unused to protect a greater truth. Secrecy above all. It was the rule of Ultra, the burden of those who carried it, and one of the most haunting dilemmas of the war. Part 11. The Terrible Choice. There are moments in history when knowing too much becomes its own kind of torment. At Bletchley Park, the machines rattled, the papers piled up, and the decrypted words appeared with clarity. Each breakthrough was a triumph of patience and intellect. Yet what followed those triumphs was not always relief. Often it was silence, and silence could feel heavier than ignorance. One of the most haunting dilemmas faced by those who held ultra-intelligence was the choice of when to act. The enemy's secrets had been unlocked, but if the Allies used that knowledge too freely, the Germans might realize their code had been compromised. The Enigma would be altered, perhaps replaced entirely, and the door that had been opened at such cost would slam shut. And so, time and again, decisions were made not to act on what was known. There were convoys sailing across the Atlantic, their positions reported in Enigma messages. Bletchley Park read the coordinates, the routes, even the times of departure. The wolf packs of U-boats lurked in wait, their ambushes planned. To save every convoy by rerouting them would have been to reveal the truth. And so, sometimes, convoys were left on their courses, their fate sealed even as their doom was read in advance. It was a kind of cruelty imposed by necessity, the sacrifice of some so that many more might be saved later. Those who worked at Bletchley did not make these decisions themselves. They passed the decrypts along, the words clean and sharp against the white paper. Others, far removed, decided whether to intervene. But the knowledge that some messages contained warnings never acted upon lingered in the back of every mind. Each operator, each cryptographer, knew that the papers they handled might carry the seeds of disaster as well as salvation. One story often recalled is that of Coventry in November 1940. A decrypted message revealed that a German bombing raid was planned, though the exact target was uncertain. Some believed the warning was specific enough that the city might have been spared, while others argued that the intelligence was too vague to act upon without risking the secret. That night, Coventry burned under the weight of bombs. Hundreds were killed, thousands injured, and much of the city destroyed. 4 years afterward, whispers spread that Churchill himself had chosen not to act to protect Ultra. Historians later debated the accuracy of the tale, pointing out that the intelligence had not been precise enough to identify the city with certainty. Yet the story endures, not only because of what did or did not happen, but because it captures the essence of the terrible choices that had to be made. The Battle of the Atlantic brought many more such choices. Convoys of merchant ships, their holds full of food and weapons, were sometimes guided safely to port, rerouted just in time to evade danger. Others sailed straight into ambushes known in advance, their fate allowed to unfold. The men aboard those ships never knew that somewhere in England, their deaths had been foreseen. They never knew that the silence of Bletchley Park had sealed their fate. It is difficult, even now, to imagine the weight of such decisions. Leaders told themselves that by preserving the secret, they were saving more lives in the long run. If Ultra remained intact, the war could be shortened and victory secured. If Ultra was lost, the war might drag on, costing far more lives. The logic was ruthless but compelling. In war, the arithmetic of sacrifice is often cruel. For those who bore the secret, the cruelty left scars. After the war, many veterans of Bletchley remembered not the triumphs alone, but the haunting knowledge that sometimes they had been forced to let tragedy unfold. They carried this burden in silence, unable to explain to families or friends why certain disasters had not been prevented, why some losses had seemed avoidable. The truth was too secret to tell, and so they bore it alone. In the stillness of the huts, the work went on. Operators continued to type, bombers continued to spin, mathematicians continued to trace patterns. Each day brought new messages, new choices, new burdens. They worked not for glory, not even for recognition, but because they believed that the long road of secrecy would lead to victory. Imagine for a moment the mind of a young woman operating a bomb late at night. The machine clatters loudly, the drums spin, and finally the relay clicks to a stop. She notes the result, carries it to another hut, and goes back to her machine. She does not know what the result will mean. Perhaps it will save a convoy. Perhaps it will reveal an ambush that cannot be acted upon. Her task is only to record and continue, her conscience protected by ignorance. But somewhere above her, in the chain of command, a man reads the decrypted message and feels the weight of choice pressing down. He knows what will happen, and he knows he cannot always stop it. This was the true torment of Ultra, knowledge chained by necessity. The codebreakers had achieved a miracle, but miracles are not free. The cost was measured not only in sleepless nights and endless toil, but also in lives lost deliberately, sacrificed to protect the secret. Few things are more painful than the knowledge that one might save someone and choosing not to. Yet in the strange logic of war, it was sometimes the only way forward. And so, through the long years of conflict, the terrible choice was made again and again. To act or not to act. To save a few and risk the secret, or to let tragedy unfold and preserve the greater advantage. Those choices, invisible at the time, shaped the war as surely as any battle. They remind us that victory is often built not only on courage and strength, but also on silence, restraint, and sacrifice. As this chapter draws to a close, we linger with the image of a paper being folded and placed in a file. On its surface are words that reveal disaster. The men in the room exchange glances, nod quietly, and decide to do nothing. Outside, the world moves on, unaware. In Coventry, in the Atlantic, in places scattered across the globe, lives continue toward fates already written. The secret is preserved, the war continues, and those who know remain silent. It is a silence that would last not only through the war, but for decades after. Part 12. Victory in Silence. The war stretched across continents, and with every campaign, Enigma played its quiet role. Messages flashed through the air in endless streams, operators hunched over their machines, confident that the codes would shield their words. At Bletchley Park, the same messages arrived stripped of mystery, translated into plain language through patience, machines, and mathematics. What had once been hidden became visible, and what was visible began to shape the outcome of battles far from the quiet huts of England. In North Africa, the desert became a chessboard of tanks and troops, dust swirling in the hot wind. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, earned his reputation through cunning maneuvers, striking where he was least expected. His success depended on mobility, surprise, and the speed of his orders. Those orders, of course, traveled through Enigma. Rommel believed his moves invisible, but in reality, many of his plans were read in advance at Bletchley. Allied commanders, armed with Ultra, could anticipate his attacks, strengthen vulnerable positions, and counter moves before they unfolded. Victories in the desert were not only the result of courage in battle, but of whispers decoded in English huts. The same was true at sea. Ultra allowed Allied fleets to anticipate supply runs, track warships, and prepare ambushes. Entire convoys carrying fuel and ammunition to Rommel's Afrika Corps were intercepted and destroyed, leaving his forces starved of the resources they needed. Soldiers at the front lines saw only the empty fuel tanks and dwindling supplies. They did not know that far away, the bombers had rattled, and the codes had been broken, sealing their fate long before the desert sun rose on their battles. In the skies over Europe, Ultra revealed the timing and targets of bombing raids, allowing civilians to seek shelter and defenses to prepare. In occupied territories, resistance fighters benefited from Allied knowledge that seemed impossibly accurate, as though someone were whispering in their ears. They did not know that the whispers came from messages never meant for them, cracked and translated before being quietly passed along. The power of Ultra grew, but so too did the discipline of secrecy. Every success had to be disguised. Allied commanders often explained their foresight with invented reasons. Reconnaissance flights that had supposedly spotted the enemy, patrols that had stumbled upon information, spies who had provided details. The Germans, misled by these fabrications, saw only chance and misfortune. They did not realize that the real reason lay in the broken heart of their own machine. Nowhere was the influence of Ultra more decisive than in the preparation for the invasion of Europe. As plans for D-Day took shape, Bletchley Park provided a constant stream of information about German defenses. Messages revealed the placement of troops, the strength of fortifications, and the expectations of German commanders. This knowledge allowed the Allies to plan with confidence, choosing their timing and landing sites with greater clarity. The Germans believed their coastlines strong, yet many of their assumptions had already been read and accounted for. The deception campaigns that surrounded D-Day were also strengthened by Ultra. The Allies needed to convince the Germans that the invasion would fall elsewhere, at Calais, perhaps, rather than Normandy. Through carefully crafted false signals, double agents, and staged movements, they built an elaborate illusion. Ultra confirmed that the Germans had taken the bait, reporting back the enemy's beliefs in their own words. The Allies could see, almost in real time, how their deceptions were working. It was like playing a game of cards while holding not only your own hand but also a glimpse of your opponent's. For those at Bletchley Park, the knowledge that their work was shaping battles far away was both thrilling and sobering. They rarely saw the details, but they knew that every successful decryption carried consequences. A convoy saved, a desert victory secured, an invasion planned with greater certainty, all were fruits of their labor. Yet the secrecy remained absolute. They returned to their billets, wrote vague letters to families, and kept silent about the role they played in victories that shook the world. The silence was part of the victory. If the Germans had realized how deeply their communications were compromised, they might have changed their systems beyond reach. The illusion of security was as important to the Allies as the reality of broken codes. The Germans continued to trust Enigma, even as it betrayed them daily. It was the perfect irony. A machine designed to guarantee secrecy became the greatest source of intelligence for their enemies. As the war moved into its final years, Ultra touched nearly every front. In Italy, in the Pacific, in the skies, and on the seas, the whispers of Enigma guided Allied strategy. Leaders like Eisenhower later remarked that Ultra had shortened the war by years. Without it, the cost of victory might have been far greater. Yet at the time, those who made use of the intelligence rarely knew its source. They accepted the knowledge, acted upon it, and moved on, never asking too many questions about how such precision was possible. For the men and women at Bletchley, the victories remained abstract. They knew the messages were important, but they did not see the battles unfold. Their triumphs came in the form of a machine halting, a decrypt completed, a courier carrying an envelope. They celebrated quietly, if at all, with a shared smile, a cup of tea, or the simple satisfaction of work well done. The war beyond was distant, yet they knew they were part of it, shaping it in silence. The paradox of victory in silence defined their lives. They could not speak of what they had achieved, not even to those closest to them. They carried their memories like sealed envelopes, unopened even among family. After the war, many returned to ordinary jobs: teachers, clerks, professors, housewives, their great contribution unmentioned. For decades, the world did not know that the war had been tilted by the quiet persistence of codebreakers in wooden huts. And so, as we let this chapter rest, we picture the vast sweep of the war: desert sands, rolling oceans, fortified coastlines, and crowded skies. Across each of these landscapes moved armies, fleets, and squadrons, guided by messages they believed secret. And beneath them all, hidden in the quiet of the English countryside, a different army labored unseen. Their weapons were not rifles or tanks but pencils, machines, and logic. Their victories were invisible, their triumphs disguised. Yet without them, the course of the war might have been very different. Victory in silence. It was not the kind of victory celebrated in parades or carved into monuments. It was a victory measured in battles turned, invasions guided, and wars shortened. It was the victory of those who whispered where others shouted, who remained unseen while the world's fate was decided. And in that silence, history was changed forever. Part 13. After the War. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the world staggered into a new age. Cities lay in ruins, nations were exhausted, and millions of lives had been lost. Victory had come, but it carried the heavy weight of sorrow. For those who had labored in secret at Bletchley Park, the war's end did not bring parades or public recognition. Instead, it brought silence of a different kind. Their work, more than almost any other, was wrapped in secrecy so tight that even in peace it could not be spoken of. The people of Bletchley left their huts quietly. Some returned to universities, picking up studies interrupted by war. Others became teachers, civil servants, or returned to family businesses. Many simply melted back into the fabric of ordinary life. They carried with them the memory of years spent in cramped huts, of endless nights bent over papers and machines, of triumphs and sorrows that could never be shared. But they did not speak of it. The Official Secrets Act bound them as tightly in peace as it had in war. What they had done, they had to carry within, unspoken even to spouses, children, or closest friends. The secrecy had a strange consequence. To the world outside, the Enigma machine seemed untouched, its reputation unbroken. Many countries, unaware of what had really happened, bought surplus Enigmas from the Germans after the war. They used them for their own communications, believing the machine to be as secure as the Germans once had. Governments in Africa, the Middle East, and elsewhere sent their messages through these boxes of rotors and lamps, never realizing that British intelligence could read them almost as easily as they had read the Wehrmachts during the war. It was a deception born of silence, and it extended the life of Ultra into the uneasy years of the Cold War. For those who had broken Enigma, this was both strange and frustrating. They knew the truth, but they could not speak it. They watched as the machine they had dismantled piece by piece was still treated as unassailable. They saw it sold, traded, and carried into offices and embassies. They knew that the victories they had achieved were not yet history but still part of a living secret. Their silence was now part of a larger game, one that stretched beyond the war they had fought. In Britain, the files of Ultra were locked away in government archives, sealed for decades. Historians wrote about the Second World War without knowing the full story. Books and memoirs poured forth. Generals and politicians explained their decisions. Campaigns were studied in detail, and yet the hidden hand of Bletchley Park remained invisible. To those who had lived it, the accounts of the war often felt incomplete, as though a vast shadow had been left out. But they could not correct the record. Their lips remained sealed. This secrecy was not only a matter of policy, it was a matter of habit. For 6 years, those at Bletchley had lived in silence. They had trained themselves never to speak openly of what they did, to refer to their work only in vague terms. After the war, this silence clung to them. Even when the Official Secrets Act was eventually relaxed, many could not bring themselves to talk. They had grown used to secrecy as a second skin, and to shed it felt unnatural. Some took their stories to the grave without ever telling their families the part they had played in history. In the years immediately after the war, attention shifted quickly. The Cold War loomed, nuclear weapons became the focus of fear, and new tensions divided the world. In this climate, the story of Enigma was not one governments wished to share. To admit how much had been achieved at Bletchley would have revealed methods still in use, capabilities still valuable. Silence was safer. The men at the center of the story did not live to see their recognition. Marian Rejewski, who had first mapped the mathematics of the machine, returned to Poland after the war, where he lived under a government that did not honor his work. Henryk Zygalski also returned to obscurity, his achievements known to only a handful. Alan Turing, whose vision of machines had transformed the struggle, met a tragic fate, persecuted in the very country he had helped to save. Their names were absent from history books, their contributions invisible to the public. Yet even in silence, their legacy lingered. The work at Bletchley had planted seeds in the field of computing, seeds that would grow in later decades into the machines that shaped the modern world. Turing's ideas about logic and computation, born of his struggle with Enigma, pointed toward a future no one else yet imagined. The people of Bletchley had not only shortened a war, they had quietly ushered in the digital age. For decades, the world did not know. The myth of Enigma as unbroken persisted, the role of Ultra hidden. Veterans of Bletchley carried their memories like unopened letters, folded and sealed. The silence was so complete that even as they gathered in reunions years later, they spoke in careful fragments, never sure what they were allowed to share. Their children and grandchildren sometimes sensed there was a story untold, but when they asked, they received only smiles, shrugs, or vague answers about clerical work. Only in the 1970s did the truth begin to emerge. Files were declassified, memoirs began to be written, and slowly the world learned of the great secret. The story astonished historians. Campaigns once puzzling now made sense. Victories once attributed to luck revealed their hidden causes. The shadow lifted, and in its place stood the quiet huts of Bletchley Park, filled with ordinary people who had done extraordinary things. But for decades after 1945, the story of Enigma was one of silence. It was a silence that hid triumph, tragedy, and the birth of new ideas. It was a silence that allowed governments to keep using the machine as bait for the unwary. And it was a silence carried in the hearts of thousands of men and women who had once bent over papers in dimly lit huts, who had once tended great machines that rattled through the night. As we let this chapter close, we picture one of them years later, sitting quietly in an ordinary living room, perhaps knitting, perhaps reading, perhaps sipping tea. A friend asks about the war, and she smiles faintly, saying she only did clerical work. She does not explain that she once carried messages that changed the course of battles, that she once tended a machine whose noise echoed the fate of nations. She does not explain because she cannot. The story is sealed inside her, as it was sealed inside so many. After the war, the Enigma machine lived on in ignorance, sold and trusted by those who did not know. The people who had broken it lived on in silence, their triumph hidden. History moved forward, unaware of the truth waiting in the shadows. And so the story of Enigma, for a generation, was not one of revelation but of quiet, enduring secrecy. Part 14. Alan Turing and the Shadow. Among the many names bound forever to the story of Enigma, one stands apart in both brilliance and tragedy. Alan Turing was not the only mind to shape the struggle, nor was he the sole architect of victory, but his vision and his methods left a mark so deep that they outlived the war itself. To speak of Bletchley Park is to speak of Turing, and yet his story did not end with the triumph of 1945. It ended instead in shadows, a reminder that even those who change the world are not always honored by it. During the war, Turing lived a life almost entirely within the grounds of Bletchley. He was eccentric, often absorbed in his own thoughts, sometimes walking the paths of the estate with scraps of paper in his pocket, scribbling equations while others hurried past. His colleagues found him brilliant, awkward, and sometimes difficult to follow, but his insights were undeniable. The bomb, that great electromechanical weapon against Enigma, bore his signature ideas, his way of turning abstract mathematics into practical machinery. Without him, the battle against German codes would have been far longer and far more uncertain. Yet Turing himself did not seek recognition. He seemed indifferent to authority, unconcerned with appearances, more interested in ideas than in the trappings of rank or power. While others fretted over comfort or status, Turing worked late into the night, fueled by his fascination with patterns and logic. For him, the war was a vast problem to be solved, and Enigma was the most difficult puzzle of all. When the war ended, Turing did not fade into obscurity like so many of his colleagues. Instead, he carried forward the ideas born of his wartime work into the new field of computing. He imagined machines not only for code breaking but for thought itself. In 1936, even before the war, he had described the theoretical machine that would later bear his name, the Turing machine, an abstract model of computation. After the war, he returned to this vision, convinced that the principles of logic and mathematics could give birth to real machines capable of extraordinary feats. At the National Physical Laboratory, he designed plans for an automatic computing engine, one of the earliest concepts for a stored program computer. Later, at Manchester, he worked on practical machines that became some of the first true computers. To Turing, the line between mathematics and machinery was thin. The war had shown him that logic could be turned into wires and relays, into spinning drums that conquered complexity. Now he sought to carry that lesson into peace, to create machines that might think, calculate, and learn. But if his intellect soared, his personal life faced storms. Turing lived openly in some ways, but in the Britain of the 1940s and 1950s, his homosexuality was criminalized. What he considered simply part of who he was, society treated as a crime. In 1952, he was prosecuted for gross indecency, a charge that carried with it humiliation and punishment. Offered a choice between prison and chemical treatment to suppress his desires, he chose the latter. The treatment brought suffering and side effects, and the weight of shame pressed down on him. It is bitter to reflect that the man who had helped shorten the war, who had saved countless lives through his work, was treated with such cruelty by the country he had served. His security clearances were revoked, his career stunted, and his spirit weighed by injustice. In 1954, at the age of only 41, Alan Turing was found dead, a half-eaten apple by his bedside. The cause was cyanide poisoning. Whether it was an accident born of his experiments or a deliberate act has been debated, but the loss was undeniable. For decades, his story remained half-hidden, his name absent from the honors bestowed on others. Bletchley Park itself remained shrouded in secrecy, and so his role was invisible to the public. But when the story of Ultra and Enigma finally began to emerge in the 1970s, Turing's name came to the fore. The world began to see what had been hidden, that behind the victory lay not only machines and methods, but the mind of a man who had seen further than most. Recognition came slowly. In time, Turing was celebrated as one of the fathers of modern computing. His name was attached to the idea of artificial intelligence, his Turing test a measure of whether machines might ever truly think. Statues were raised, biographies written, apologies issued for the injustice he suffered. In 2009, the British government formally apologized for his treatment. In 2013, he was granted a posthumous pardon. His face now appears on currency, a symbol of both brilliance and resilience. And yet, even with honors restored, his story retains its shadow. It reminds us that genius is not always recognized in its own time, that those who give the most can be treated with the least. It reminds us, too, that the victories of war do not erase the injustices of peace. Turing's life is both triumph and tragedy, a testament to the heights of human intellect and the depths of human prejudice. For the veterans of Bletchley who lived long enough to see the truth emerge, Turing's recognition must have been bittersweet. They remembered him not as a legend but as a colleague, the man who bicycled around the grounds with his gas mask dangling from the handlebars, who chained his tea mug to a radiator so it would not be stolen, who mumbled equations under his breath as he walked the halls. They remembered his humanity as much as his genius. The world, at last, came to know both. As we let this chapter rest, we picture him in one of the huts at Bletchley, leaning over a table littered with papers, a half-empty cup of tea by his hand. The bomb clatters in the next room, its drums spinning, its relays clicking. Turing stares at his notes, lost in thought, his mind already moving beyond the immediate problem toward ideas of machines that might one day do far more. Around him, colleagues work, laugh, and sigh with exhaustion. He seems apart, but in truth, he is woven into the fabric of it all. Alan Turing helped break Enigma. He helped shorten the war. He helped imagine the future of computation. And yet his life ended too soon, shadowed by injustice. His story is a reminder that history is not only about victories and machines, but about the people who shape them, their brilliance, their flaws, and their struggles. In the shadow of Enigma, his light shines all the more brightly, even if it flickered too briefly. Part 15. The Legacy of the Rotors. The Enigma machine was, in its time, a marvel of engineering and a symbol of certainty. It embodied the belief that secrecy could be made absolute, that with enough complexity, a nation could cloak its thoughts from the world. For the Germans who trusted it, Enigma was a fortress. For the Allies who broke it, it was a door into the mind of the enemy. And for those who came after, it became a lesson that no fortress is unassailable, that secrecy is never perfect, and that the quiet persistence of human minds can undo even the most carefully constructed illusions. After the war, as the world moved into the age of nuclear weapons and global politics reshaped itself into East versus West, the story of Enigma remained hidden. The machines themselves, however, did not vanish. Many were sold, discarded, or kept as souvenirs. Some ended up in museums, others in private collections. In the early decades of the Cold War, some governments even used them, unaware that the machine they trusted had already been compromised. For British intelligence, this lingering ignorance was useful. By continuing to read the messages of those who relied on Enigma, they extended the life of Ultra into peacetime, harvesting secrets under the cover of silence. But history has a way of revealing its hidden layers. When the files were opened in the 1970s, and the world learned the story of Bletchley Park, the Enigma machine became something else entirely. It became a symbol of ingenuity, of the strange marriage between human patience and mechanical assistance, and of the quiet heroism of those who labored unseen. The small wooden box with its rotors and lamps came to stand not only for German confidence but also for Allied persistence. Where once it had been a tool of secrecy, it became a relic of revelation. Today, the Enigma machine sits behind glass in museums. Visitors peer at its keys and rotors, marveling at its weight and its simplicity. Children press their noses to the glass, imagining what it must have been like to tap out a message and see the lamps flicker in reply. Few can grasp, just by looking, the terror and hope once bound to those lamps. But in the quiet of the display case, the machine seems to whisper still, a reminder of the hidden wars fought with pencils, wires, and silence. The legacy of Enigma is not only about the past. It reaches into the present, into the very heart of modern life. The science of cryptography that defeated Enigma has grown into the systems that protect our digital world. Every time a message is sent securely over the internet, every time a password is stored or a bank transaction protected, it is part of the lineage that began with the struggle against those rotors. The mathematics of secrecy, once used to break the codes of war, is now woven into the fabric of daily life. And yet the lesson of Enigma is not one of comfort. It reminds us that no system is truly unbreakable. Just as the Germans believed in their machine and were undone, so too must we remember that certainty in secrecy is an illusion. The story of Bletchley teaches humility, that every code has a weakness, every fortress a crack, and that vigilance is as important as confidence. The legacy is also moral. The story of Ultra and the terrible choices it demanded speaks to the burdens of knowledge. To know and not to act and risk exposure, these dilemmas linger beyond war. They remind us that information is power, but power is never simple. It carries weight, responsibility, and often sacrifice. The men and women of Bletchley Park bore that weight in silence, their victories hidden, their sorrows unspoken. Their story teaches not only about machines but about the human heart under strain. Alan Turing's shadow, too, stretches into the legacy of Enigma. His ideas shaped the birth of computing, and his story reminds us of the cost of prejudice. His life tells us that brilliance can be dimmed by injustice, that even those who give everything may suffer at the hands of their own society. The lesson is clear: to value not only the work but the people who create it, to honor not only the victory but the humanity behind it. As the decades pass, the story of Enigma has become almost mythic. It appears in books, films, and classrooms, a tale of mystery, genius, and triumph. But beneath the myth lies something quieter and truer, a story of ordinary people asked to do extraordinary things. Clerks, mathematicians, engineers, and operators, working long hours in cramped huts, driven not by fame but by necessity. Their lives were filled with fatigue, secrecy, and silence, yet their persistence helped turn the tide of history. Perhaps that is the final legacy of the Rotors. Not the machine itself, nor even the codes it produced, but the reminder of what patience, logic, and cooperation can achieve. The Rotors spun endlessly, producing complexity meant to baffle the world. Against them stood men and women with chalk, pencils, and determination. And in the end, the Rotors lost. We leave this story with a final image. A museum hall, quiet and cool, sunlight falling through tall windows. Behind glass sits an Enigma machine, its keys worn by the touch of hands long gone. A visitor leans in, seeing their own reflection on the surface of the glass. The machine is silent now, its secrets long unraveled. But in that silence echoes the hum of bombers, the scratch of pens, the murmur of voices in wooden huts. It echoes the footsteps of couriers, the sighs of tired operators, the distant rumble of war. The rotors no longer spin, yet their legacy does. They remind us of the fragility of secrets, the endurance of patience, and the quiet heroism of those who worked unseen. They remind us that history is not only shaped on battlefields but also in small rooms filled with paper, wires, and minds unwilling to give up. The Enigma machine was born of arrogance, broken by persistence, and remembered now as a symbol of both. Its legacy is not locked in the past. It turns still, quietly, in the codes that guard our present and the lessons that guide our future. And so our journey with the Enigma machine comes to a close. From its invention to its unraveling, and through the quiet persistence of those who labored in secrecy, we've walked together through a story of codes, courage, and silence. It is a reminder that history is not only written on battlefields, but also in hidden rooms filled with chalkboards, wires, and patient minds who refuse to give up. As you rest with these thoughts, I hope the calm flow of this story has brought you both knowledge and peace. If it has, I'd be grateful if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, so you'll be here for the next journey into history told slowly, gently, and with care. And if you'd like, leave a comment below sharing where you're listening from. It's always wonderful to see our circle of listeners stretching across the world. For now, let the story settle, and let yourself drift. History will be here again tomorrow. But tonight, may you find rest, and may your dreams be peaceful.